On behalf of Visium Analytics and Carasoft, we would like to welcome you to today's podcast, focused around You Can't Secure What You Can't See. Apply TruContext to your Splunk data. We're Jesse Jones, Chief Architect at Visium Analytics, and Joel Kelly, Director of Special Projects. We'll discuss how TruContext TM enriches your Splunk processed data with an intuitive topological type view of the relationships amongst disparate data points.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joel Kelly, and I'm the Special Projects Lead for Visium Technologies. The need to better utilize your data and protect your environment is common to us all. So I want to thank you all for joining. We didn't have a whole lot of runway in terms of time in getting folks around the campfire for this. So the fact that we have a really nice showing, again, from people across public and private sector, we're grateful for that. So thanks again for showing up. Jesse Jones, our Chief Architect, will take you through TruContext, powered by SiteGraph. And then finally, I will provide you with a little bit of info on how to price and configure and order TruContext. All right, so what do we do? So Visium Technologies is a cybersecurity company. And if I had 3 seconds in an elevator to explain what we do, I'd tell you that we essentially bring isolated data and events together, right? And we integrate that data with existing cyber tools. And then from there, we create an overall and a rather comprehensive picture for decision support and situational awareness. MITRE Corporation. Hopefully, many of you have heard of MITRE Corporation. They've developed a globally accessible cybersecurity knowledge base, which essentially provides usable guidance, specifically tactics and techniques used to secure environments known as attack framework. Essentially, we integrate the attack framework into TruContext. Visium Technologies owns the exclusive rights to this framework, commonly referred to as SiteGraph, which is now what we call TruContext. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. So without further ado, let's get into the technology a little bit. I'll hand it off to Jesse. And Jesse, take it away.
Thanks for the intro.
Yep.
Good morning, everyone. Or no, it's afternoon now, isn't it? Yeah. So just to get started here, we'll talk a little bit about the challenge, right? What are we trying to solve here? Big issue we see across the industry, and regardless of where you're at, government, civilian, commercial, what have you, and definitely if you're in a medium-sized organization and larger organizations, you're getting inundated with cyber events. Many times to the point to where it's overwhelming, and you really can't hire enough staff to kind of take care of it, right? To mitigate what you're seeing, or even to properly discern sometimes, whether or not you're tracking down the right things or not. Much of this can be kind of boiled down to noise in a sense, right? You have so many duplicate events, duplicate information points and so forth. And it's just all sort of jumbled into just a lot of data basically coming at you in your organizations. And you're trying to decipher this here, even with, the industry leading tools, right? So just about any medium-sized and larger organizations for sure are going to have some sophisticated tool sets within their repertoire, right, to address the various different, cybersecurity concerns or events, and you have scanning tools, you got your SIM tools such as Splunk and others, right? Just big data tools such as Splunk. Even then, it's still a bit sort of overwhelming, right? We see big organizations, whether they're commercial or government, right? They're still getting compromised in the midst of all the sophisticated tool sets that we have. And one of the things that you end up having that becomes a missing factor is that context. Many environments, they struggle with trying to apply context to, say, the inundation or the voluminous data that's coming their direction. So when you don't have context, you end up spending a lot of time just trying to figure the data out, even before you get to points of prioritizing and making decisions and so on and so forth, right? So it's just a lot of kind of upfront legwork being done before you even start analysis. So one of the things that we're doing here, right, this challenge, we're providing a solution where you can see your data, day one, 0 day, however you want to frame it. So inherently, as part of our platform, as data is being ingested, whether it's through batch mode or real-time Kafka streaming mode, bottom line is you're going to be able to see your data. And when you see it, what that really means is that you can see the form of your data. Once you can see the form of your data, you're starting to get all sorts of context, right? It helps you in so many different ways, from being able to prioritize, better utilize your resources and so forth. So again, and this is all happening inherently, almost kind of like I'm sure anyone that's listening to this may be familiar with just the data industry in general and what ETL means, right? Extract, transform, load. In a sense, it's almost an auto ETL inherently built into the tool, because as we ingest tool, we automatically render data in this particular way that you can actually see and understand it intuitively. All right. So, and ultimately that's going to drive better decisions and so forth. But context is really the key to being able to pull out the signal from the high volume of noise that even consumers, right, in some of their home networks are seeing. What we allow you to do is overlay context on everything. So whether you're taking discrete, your favorite tools that you already have, and the one thing that you're going to commonly find missing generally from tools in the market today in the cybersecurity ecosystem in particular is something that gives you that context right out the gate, so you can start making quick and decisions at velocity, right? So you can take our capability in the way that we ingest and process data and apply some of our algorithms. You can take it day one and just overlay it on just about any type of data set you can imagine, right? And we're focusing on cybersecurity here. All right. So, and then once you apply that context, now it becomes very intuitive, the data sets, even almost like a whiteboard scenario, right? People without deep understanding, if you will, can even understand the data, right? So it's very intuitive. And once the data is intuitive, now, in essence, what you've ended up doing, I spoke to this on the previous chart, you've automated that ETL process in a sense. So now you reduce the burden on your staff. So you're saving time, head count, et cetera. And then within your organizations, you're able to see all your assets and the interrelations there, which ultimately that's what it takes to see context, is actually understanding the interrelations, right? So in essence, what we're providing here, in a sense, you could think of it as an enrichment engine to any of your tools, existing tools, a complement to those existing tools, right? And also, or just data in general. We can pull in raw data that's not even coming from another tool if that's the need. So let's just level set a little bit on what graph is, right? Graph technology, for those that may not be as familiar. I imagine most folks on this call are probably familiar with it, but we'll do this sort of quick intro sort of session here. This is the essence of what we mean by seeing your data. You're starting to see form, you can see topologies associated with your data, but these circles here, what those are identified are as nodes in graph vernacular, right? In the graph technology sphere. And the vectors that you see are identified as relationships or edges. Another that's kind of used synonymously, but nodes and edges. And the node, you can almost think of it as a noun, right? If you want to sort of boil it down to reduce it to its simplest terms in a sense, right? And the vectors, those edges, those relationships, right? You can consider those your verbs. So really quick, right out the gate, this gets back to the intuitive point and how folks at just about any level can take a look at this and say, man, I kind of got an understanding of what's going on. So for instance, and right now we're just using examples of people, all right? Say if you pull data from your LDAP system or what have you, right? And we just want to see relationships between people. But these could be machines, right? They can be servers, endpoints, they can be network components, routers, switches, and so forth, right? Or any kind of asset or any kind of data point. But just to kind of get the sort of rudimentary kind of understanding across, we're using people as an example. But say if you had James and say that's encompasses of his compute endpoint systems, when you see James there, and say James became compromised. What context means is now I don't just get to focus on discrete James in of itself, because many systems will tell you when a device is compromised or there's a vulnerability associated, right, through your scanning applications. But what you don't know out the gate is, all right, what impact does that have on my broader enterprise, the broader system? So this view right here, at a glance, day one, right, data is already processed and rendered in this form. You're able to see James knows Sarah. Oh, and if James is compromised, now I got to be concerned about Sarah. And not only Sarah, I got to be concerned about Sam and Cindy and John and Linda, right? Because they're just a couple of degrees of separation from Sarah. So now you get this very powerful picture. I know we all heard the word a graph tells, or picture tells 1,000 words, maybe 1,000,000 words here, because you're saving so much processing associated with all that voluminous data, that noise that we talked about on previous charts. But now, really at a glance, you know where to prioritize. Therefore, you're going to get the most out of your people, your staff. So they're not busy trying to figure out what priorities to set. They know it day one right out the gate. So that's sort of the gist, if you will, of the graph technology, the nodes, the relationships / edges, and how now you can see, and this is what context means, you can see those interrelationships and the broader system impacts or potential impacts you may have with a single individual vulnerability that, say, one of your scanning platforms could make you aware of. Again, you get this context at site. Here's a bit on the architecture layout, top level architecture view here. We can ingest, I would say it's a universe ingest engine, the way that our programmatic systems is structured, right? We can pull from raw PCAP files. We can pull net flow data. We can pull cyber events from other tools. We can extrapolate traffic patterns from PCAP files. PCAP is packet capture files, like if you're using Wireshark or something like that. We can identify vulnerabilities. We can pull directly from your Nessus systems, right? Your vulnerability scanning systems, and effectively graph the data that we get from all these disparate data points into a single composite view, which we'll talk about in a moment as well. So in essence, ingesting from anywhere within your enterprise from any data point, any other tools. So that's why it's such a complement to your existing cyber ecosystem and your other tools throughout the space, right? And this is what we mean by being able to lay context on any data for that matter, right? So now you're getting this true composite view. And now you can ultimately, once you get a composite view by ingesting from all these sources and graphing it all together with full context, all the interrelationships built in, now you finally get the full story. You can see the full story of what's going down. And this is not just confined to the enterprise either. We're going to touch on that in just a second when we look at a brief use case overlay or an overlay view of a composite graph. But one other point here, I talked about ingest a bit, but really some of that auto ETL capability I spoke about, the extract, transform, load, that's happening during the transform phase of this architecture. And ultimately the rendering that's getting done is sort of embedded in the analysis phase, right? And then you get your various different graphs of your choice really on how you want to view things that gets rendered in a very intuitive way so that all can really understand what's going on within an enterprise and a bigger systemic impacts that might be under disguise as well.
Jesse, can I interrupt you just for a second? Could you list some minimum capabilities that an organization should have or acquire to best utilize TruContext?
Yeah, an organization generally on the cybersecurity front, organizations may already have some tools in-house, such as vulnerability scanners, threat analysis systems, things like you may be a subscriber to CrowdStrike. You may have something like Rapid7 Expose as a scanner. You may have other SIMs, right? Or SIMs such as Splunk, right? Security information event management systems. So any of those type of components that are doing a certain amount of processing, but albeit without context yet, if you use those as sources, as feeder points into the system here, we're going to, in essence, be able to enrich what you already have from those components, therefore give you a fair amount more value out of what you're getting, sort of output you get from those systems. Now, with that said, in essence, we could step into an organization without any of those tools, and we can start from a greenfield perspective, where we're just pulling data off of your wire, we're pulling data from your routers and switches, and I'm talking in more of a net-centric system here, or it could just be data about your organization, right? It could be LDAP data about the people and locations and roles and different things, right? And we can overlay that onto your technology infrastructure and technology assets. So, if the use case required, we come into a greenfield, there's a way to do that. And any organization is going to have ways that we can pull just raw data on the information of their environments. Again, whether it's your LDAP, which could also means your Active Directory systems, or it could be your just traffic on your networks. We can pull that in without actually requiring any other tool as a feeder. But many times what we see, if you have other tools that you're utilizing, that we add a fair amount of value to that, because we're basically able to take the already processed data and present it in a way where you can see context. So there's a few ways to skin that cat there, but I would say, in the Splunk situation, right, you already have Splunk. Now we're going to add another level of value to your Splunk infrastructure by being able to render context on top of Splunk intelligence and Splunk correlated data.
Thank you, Jesse. Can this be used as a standalone tool in addition to an add-on? Can you speak to the ability to detect and assess impact of any of these mainstream media data breaches like SolarWinds?
Yeah, it could be in a sense a standalone, right? Where you have scenarios like SolarWinds. Much of that probably would have been identified through your scanning systems, right? Once that was identified vulnerability, that became a CVE, and so forth, right? So your scanning systems are picking that up. But in a case where you have certain traffic patterns through some of the intelligent algorithms we have here, we can pull data straight from your wire, right, and decipher some of those traffic patterns, right, and render it in an effective graph, basically. And you're seeing context of traffic flows. And again, I'm speaking network centric here, and that's partially because this composite overlay view that I'll talk about in a second is more network centric. But in essence, in that sense, we can pull directly from your wire. It's obviously it's not intended to be a one size fits all. There's always specialty areas, but there is room where this can come in. Depends on the application, right, or the use case, and sort of perform in a greenfield environment just by pulling sort of traffic statistics and data from existing assets, right? Whether it be just pulling event log data from your Windows or Linux or Mac platforms, right? We can take that data and then we can actually construct it into a graph and provide meaningful insight there. So I sort of alluded to this a little bit on the previous question, but I guess the short answer is yes, it can function in that capacity as well. However, there's not many organizations that don't already have some tools. So the big benefit we've seen at this point has been complementing existing tools within an ecosystem, such as Splunk, with the context, right? So they've already done a fair amount of processing of data. Now we can come in and provide this interrelationship view. With our platform, we've developed some intelligence where we can overlay data sets from different sources, even outside of your enterprise. For instance, like if you got a cloud space, right? Generally, that's an extension of the enterprise, but that's still a different domain. Or if you have just stuff out in the public domain, like there's many databases out there that we can pull data in. Matter of fact, we may have done some of it even in a demonstration here from IP data, basically a site that provides basically geolocation of IP assets across the globe. And you got other data, maybe if you have a CrowdStrike type service that's doing threat analysis, basically in the public space, we can pull data from there. You got CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Systems Agency, right, for the US. We can pull data from there as well, from some of their databases. And then from that perspective, these vertex points, in a sense, those are points where we can graph data from these different domains together and give you one single unified picture. Now you got the full story, right? So you can actually do root cause analysis here, and our system has some intelligence to help with that as well, right? And provide root cause analysis determination. So if I had a compromise and within my data center, if you're sort of tracking this sort of picture here, and I determined, I looked at some of the threat identifiers, right? Maybe some of the CVE material, and I was able to start to map that back to threat actors. And through some of my public domain data ingest, I was able to map certain threat actors that aligned with the CVE or attack framework information, possibly, right, back to a particular known exfiltration command center. So now I'm starting to see root cause analysis, some of my internal problems, because I get the full picture and I see the relationships of all the different assets, no matter where they're coming from. As long as I can pull data in, right? Again, I just graph those different data sources and create one composite view. I graph them at these sort of vertex points. And we'll touch on this just a little bit in the demonstration as well. I got a similar view in the demonstration. We'll touch on just a little bit more, even though the demonstration is really intended to lay out just the structure of the platform and show a little bit of the capability there. So TruContext, if you will, for Splunk. The point being is you can't secure what you can't see. That sort of tag there, I think that says it all. In a sense, what we allow you to do through overlaying context is to provide form to your data. Again, provide a form that you can see and recognize and understand and make intelligent decisions on, and rapid decisions for that matter. So, Splunk has this vast amount of usage, capability, and value, right, in intelligence. So we're able to take all that great work that Splunk is already doing, and now we're able to fill a small gap where there may lie where there's not enough context, and we'll fill that gap with our capability through our integration, approved integration with Splunk, and now you can have full context, end-to-end context for that matter, depending on where you're pulling data from, and now you really get the full picture, something that you can take action on in real time, for that matter. Again, full context. So once you get that sort of context, that full context, again, now you got this insight that you can just make confident decisions on, because you understand now, you understand all the impacts across your system to a certain extent. And ultimately what that is doing is just adding higher fidelity, to your data. As I mentioned before, an enrichment engine to your existing data sets. And ultimately that starts to save time, head count, and so forth. Because again, especially the larger, medium to large organizations, you really can't even hire yourself out of this quandary because there's just so much data to a certain extent. If you don't have a good system to sort of effectively discern that data, you just don't have enough people to throw at the volumes of data that might be coming at you to make decisions. And these decisions are needed to be made in real time, basically within hours. You can find yourself at the end of a compromise or some sort of exploit. So you want to be able to see these pictures, as near to real time as possible. And here's just a further example of it, right? So, you look at some of your traditional Splunk views, and this kind of gets back to the whole see your data in the forum. You got your dashboards. Obviously, you got some more of your raw data views that you have off to the top left there. But once you apply overlay TruContext on top of Splunk, now you get to see a form, right? Something that anyone can really understand, even without necessarily knowing what a CVE is. If you had some manager or director or executive, they still see that there's a relationship between that thing called a CVE and these other devices, right? But of course, most folks looking at this are going to have some idea of what those terms mean, at least, even if they're not deep tech dive into them, right? But the bottom line is now you can see a topological form of your data in their respective relationships. So you know where to focus. You can see that CVE, the blue icon there, is associated with your LDAP server. I talked about that, or local file share, right? And then you can start to see from there, what are those things associated with, the broader impacts. You can even see how you have a threat actor associated with a personal cloud storage device, which is connected to a regional laptop. And that laptop, obviously, if it has connection to your broader enterprise in some form or fashion, there you go. You have other entry points, if you will, of possible compromise. And even in this example right here, you can even briefly see that threat actor is exfiltrating data from that personal cloud storage space. And also you'll be able to compare that and determine, hey, we have policies against that. So right out the gate, anyone can see that this laptop is violating one of our policies. You don't take deep dive, or you don't need to have an engineer to generate a report to come back to you and tell you about that. Anyone can see this almost at a dashboard level, because again, it's a whiteboard type view that's very intuitive to just look at and understand what these lines and relationships, these nodes and edges are interconnected. So at that point, again, and this is out the box, right? You see this out the box. Once we ingest data, this is rendered in real time, these types of views. You get an at first glance intuitive understanding. Therefore, you can make these pinpoint priority decisions right away. You have to prioritize maybe the laptop and a few other devices immediately to mitigate those, because they have other relationships that could maybe tap back into a command center for all we know, right? So that's the gist. So that's really what you're getting with TruContext when you add it to Splunk. You got all the valuable intelligence, but now you can actually see your data with the context, end-to-end context.
So Jesse, we do have another question. What is the typical time to value for companies using TruContext or something similar to pull the data and get context to make decisions? What's a typical ramp up time?
Yeah, I would say, obviously it's like any tool, right? You got to introduce this to your enterprise. So you bring TruContext in, we educate you on Graph a bit more in detail, and understand your data sources, whether we're dealing with a greenfield or we're dealing with, which is the majority case, right? That you have existing cyber tools that have become data source points for TruContext. In that sense, it's kind of an upfront assessment, just understanding the environment. But once we understand the environment, We have the data sources identified that, a particular enterprise may want to start with. The point of value is, near real time. Obviously, you set your system up, but once the system is set up again and you're pointing or retrieving from all the appropriate data sources, because the ETL, all that sort of transform load is done automatically, and you're automatically or inherently seeing the TruContext graph view, right, with all the relationships, the interrelationships. That's a near real time sort of thing. So, say a day, right? Once the prerequisites are done. So you have your prerequisites, the setup, and then you're seeing data in an understandable, intuitive way immediately, right? Because it's just a native inherent function of graph technology in general.
So Jesse, thank you again for that. Can alarms be set to trigger based off of these relationships TruContext exposes?
Yeah, in essence, we could configure audible alarms when there was a particular issue of concern. We configured the pulsating feature. All right, that could be audible if you wanted it to be.
Awesome. Can you configure the system to alert you to certain specified criteria or issues as they're happening?
Yes, you can. It depends. How do you want to? Obviously, it gets into the details of what do you want to identify as what type of criteria and that sort of stuff. But you can, and it can alert you effectively. You can even sort of tie it into corporate policy, right? From a NLP perspective, right? You can pull in kind of corporate policy type information, and that could be another level overlay of enrichment, right? As you're kind of going through, say, or TruContext is going through the data that's been ingested, such as we talked about on that demonstration, right? And also in the charts, you had a laptop in a regional office that was connected to a personal cloud storage that was being compromised. If we had sort of corporate policy information overlaid, that could be another flag you could see there is corporate policy number 10 violated. So yeah, in essence, you can set certain violations to based on whatever your criteria might be for your specific enterprise.
Thank you, Jesse. We do have a testimonial that basically, if I were to sum this up, what TruContext really provides is we kind of do away with the old way with charts and graphs, and we bring your data into kind of a quick contextualized view, right? So, that's my takeaway from this testimonial. I don't personally like reading word for word, but it is a testimonial from a CISO for the state of Delaware on TruContext. Wanted to share that with you. Carahsoft is our distribution partner. So for more information, feel free to contact Carahsoft. Big thank you for everyone for joining this today. We hope we hope you got something from it, and we invite you to stay engaged with us. We'd like to help you with your cybersecurity needs. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information on how Carahsoft or Visium Analytics can assist your organization, please visit www.carahsoft.com or email us at visium@carahsoft.com. Thanks again for listening, and have a great day.